Prepare for a rude awakening.
This is Michael Rood sailing the Red Sea, or in Hebrew, the Yam Suf, off the shore of Elat. This is the body of water that the Israelites crossed on dry land nearly 3,400 years ago. In our last episode, we investigated the scriptures and the archaeological evidence that still remains in the land of Egypt that attests to the accuracy of the Hebrew scriptures concerning the detail of Israel's exodus from Egypt. Now, episode 5 in the 11-part series, The Sinai Connection, Israel's ancient title deed to the land. Now we go to Pi Hakiroth, between the gorges and Baal Zephon. This is the body of water. This is the area where the children of Israel crossed. And found in this body of water, after Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula, was this coral-encrusted six-boat chariot wheel. Now, let me explain something about this particular chariot wheel. First of all, any artifact, any remnant of Pharaoh's chariots and army, after 3,500 years, would have long dissolved in this saltwater environment. There would be nothing left. However, the Creator created coral with a very specific property. Coral does not begin to grow on sand or silt. It has to have an artifact to attach to. And coral many times will form to the exact shape of the artifact. The artifact will then erode away, and all that will be left is coral, basically stone, that is the exact image of what was left behind. Sometimes coral will continue to grow and will just grow into reefs that are miles. But many times it will just grow to cover the artifact and it will stop, just like that. This particular artifact was taken out of the Red Sea. It was taken to Cairo, Egypt, to the Department of Antiquities, where it was then assembled on an 8-foot table. The director of the Department of Antiquities came in, and as he approached the table, he blurted out, "That's 18th dynasty." And they asked him, "Well, how do you know? Looking at this piece of coral so quickly, how do you know?" He said, "This is an 18th dynasty chariot wheel. It's a 6-spoke chariot wheel, just like the chariot wheels found in King Tutankhamun's tomb. It is the same diameter. It is the same 6-spoke. And as we see in Heliopolis, in the 18th dynasty, it shows the 6-spoke chariot wheel. He knew exactly what it was, and so that chariot wheel is now buried in the Department of Antiquities. Don't expect that you'll ever see it in the light of day, because they still, most of them, don't want to admit that Israel was ever in Egypt. Because modern Egyptology is based on a ridiculous fairy tale. When the Syrian Greek general conquered Egypt and Israel, he requested a history of the people of the land from both the Hebrews, the Israelites, and the Egyptians. So the Hebrews responded in this way. They got together 72 scholars who translated the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, from Hebrew into Greek. It became known as the Septuagint. That is what they presented the Syrian Greek conqueror as the history of the Jewish people. The Egyptians had one priest named Manetho concoct a history. He said for 10,000 years, gods ruled Egypt. After that, for 10,000 years, gods and men ruled Egypt. And after that, 10,000 more years, men ruled Egypt. Even in the Egyptian records, the oldest records of Manetho vary in over 1,800 names of pharaohs and gods. The Egyptians didn't even treat this as being legitimate. They knew it was a fairy tale, but yet modern Egyptology is based on the fairy tale rendition of one priest, Manethael, while the rest of the world scoffs at the Hebrew Scriptures, which gives an accurate detail. And that is what all modern biblical criticism is based on, Egyptology. Well, tonight we are going to look at the Hebrew Scriptures and we're going to see the reality of these things. And here on your screen you see that we too have done our investigations in the Red Sea. Here I am in the sailing vessel. Actually, I have in my hands the directions, how you sail this thing. But, you know, we do the best with the equipment that we have. And I have a trick up my sleeve, of course, because I know that Moses did something with his staff and parted the Red Sea, so I bring my staff along, but turns out that mine didn't work. Sometimes it's just better left to the professionals, and so that's why I want to introduce you to this gentleman. This gentleman's name is Leonard Moeller. Leonard Moeller was introduced to Ron Wyatt while he was still alive, and Ron Wyatt shared some things with Leonard Moeller that then kindled a fire in his heart, and Leonard Moeller has now taken it far beyond what Ron Wyatt could even imagine. Because Leonard Moeller is a scientist with Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. Karolinska Institute is the laboratory that awards the Nobel Prize in Science. This is not a backyard chemistry shop. This is the most prestigious laboratory in the world, and Leonard Moeller is a serious scientist that is recognized all over the world. Leonard Moeller went down to the crossing site with the most modern research vessels and equipment, the finest that money can buy, and with underwater robotic dive cameras, went down and drove these high-definition cameras among the coral-encrusted remains of Pharaoh's chariots and army. I spoke to Leonard about a month ago, and he told me that he has analyzed coral all over the world. But he said that right there at the Nueva crossing site, it is like an underwater junkyard. It is like a battlefield which is locked in time, and you see right angles, you see the circles, you see the remains of Pharaoh's chariots and army, and now we're going to let Leonard Moeller take you on this journey along the bottom of the Red Sea.
In the spring of 2000, a robotic camera was lowered into these waters for the first time.
This has never been done. No one have been in the area at all with a remote control camera.
The robotic camera's survey revealed many shapes and objects familiar to Moeller, including coral formations with right angles, arches, discs, and straight shafts fused into larger masses that had the appearance of twisted wreckage.
Now, when we have been able to go back and forth with a remote control camera, we can repeatedly see that these strange structures we are looking for are there. Not at one place, but you see them again and again and again. Situations where you see something that looks like an axle, a hub, something that looks like a wheel, and you say to yourself, this is not a coral reef, this is a coral growth on an artifact. And that is what's different to me when I compare corals at other locations around the world.
Since the earliest explorations at Nueva, one distinctive type of formation has often been identified on the sea floor. A slender, table-like structure, sometimes standing on end, with a coral-encrusted base, a straight shaft, and a circular top.
It's a 90-degree angle, a right angle, between something that looks like an axle and the wheel. And you can see this in different varieties, and it looks very different from normal coral growth. And it is like a man-made structure with a coral growth on it.
In the midst of them, Pan Chien photographed this circular object attached to what appears to have been a broken axle or hub. This discovery was significant for two reasons. Pontien had documented the coral-encrusted form of a wheel with dimensions similar to ancient Egyptian artifacts, directly across from the proposed Nueva crossing site. Her find also provided independent confirmation of earlier evidence establishing wheel-like formations on both coasts of the Red Sea, in accordance with descriptions in the biblical record.
And the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army, and he made the wheels of their chariots come off.
This particular artifact is so exciting because here you can see the chariot cab and then the broken off chariot wheel, and this is just 100 meters from the Saudi side, from the side of Midian. That means as the straggling women and children were just making their way up on the other side, this charioteer was bearing down with a sword swinging over his head, ready to lop off their heads, and right at the last second, before he took the first swipe, wham! The wheel of his chariot came out, it dumped him out, and the Red Sea closed up over on top of him. The Almighty is the master of drama. When there appears to be no hope, at the last second, then he comes through with a miracle. And is that not the way it has always been in our lives? And if we just hold on, he will always arrive right in the nick of the time. It appears that there is no hope, and that's just the way he sets the stage. It's like he wants Satan to think that he's got the victory, and at the last moment he pulls it right out of his mouth. It talks about it by the prophet. It says it's like a man that is crossing the desert, and he's dreaming that he is drinking of ice cold water, but then he wakes up and realizes that his mouth is full of sand. That's exactly what our Creator does every time we stand and he is allowed to work and perform his miracles and his work in our lives. This is one that I love. Here you can see this is the chariot wheel, the axle, and another chariot wheel. This is the diameter. The wheels are the diameter of the chariots in King Tutankhamun's tomb. The width between the wheels is the same width as the chariot in Tutankhamun's tomb. All chariots have the same width of wheels. Why? Because it is the width of the rear end of two horses. In every culture, the chariot wheels are the same width of the rear end of two horses. And it's exactly that width in this chariot that was found in Tutankhamun's tomb. This particular artifact was found again after Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula. This is a gold four-spoke chariot wheel. This particular photograph was given to me by Mr. Ron Wyatt. This particular gold four-spoke chariot wheel has only coral in the middle of it. Why? Coral has a very unique property. It does not grow on sand, silt, gold, or silver. But the coral attached itself to the metal hub and held down the gold veneer after the wheel had long disappeared. There's an underwater buoy nearby, and this will come out after Israel gets the Sinai Peninsula back, and not until. There is only one chariot that you see in Egypt that is depicted with a four-spoke chariot wheel. The chariot of Pharaoh. You could not imagine that everyone in Egypt would not only have a four-spoke chariot wheel, but that they would have gold wheels on their Mercedes. No, it's just the Pharaoh, and to have the photograph of the wheel of Pharaoh's chariot on the bottom of the Red Sea, the Almighty has indeed sanctified himself by Pharaoh. And now we are going to go over to the real Mount Sinai in the land of Midian. As it says in Galatians 4:25, Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Now, Shaul ought to know, because in Galatians, in the first chapter, he said that he spent about 3 years in Arabia. I do not believe that he went down and hung out with the kids at Riyadh University. See, Shaul was raised at the feet of Gamliel. Gamliel, even today, is one of the most revered rabbis, teachers in all the history of Israel. To sit at the feet of Gamliel, we know this one thing. To sit at Gamliel's feet, that means that by the time you were 20 years old, you would have had to have memorized the entire Torah verbatim. Here I have the Torah. This particular Torah was smuggled out of Iraq just before the last Gulf War. Saddam Hussein decreed that all of the Torah scrolls, all of the books of Moses, should be destroyed. But one of his lieutenants did something different. He made a deal with some Jewish businessmen and began to smuggle these Torah scrolls out of Iraq for a rather large sum of money. And when they were smuggled out, the skeins were broken off. And when this got to us, the skeins were broken off and there was just wood posts that were left here. It was broken off, then it was then stuffed inside of a truck tire and smuggled out of Iraq. When we got it into Israel, then we took it down to Mei Sharim, down to the ultra-Orthodox community, where a friend of mine down there, a Sephardic Jew, makes the skeins. These skeins happen to be old ones. They're about 100 years old. Not that old, but this particular Torah scroll is about 300 years old, older than America. And I brought it so that you could see this and witness it for yourself, because this is how the Word of God was transmitted for over 3,000 years. And even still, to this very day, the Torah is still written on the hides of sheep. In order for one to have a Torah scroll, a synagogue or an individual, means you had to be quite wealthy. You had to be able to afford to slaughter an entire flock of sheep. This particular Torah scroll has the hides of 55 sheep. Rather expensive in today's market. Then these hides would be tanned, and then a scribe who was trained from youth to make an exact copy of an older Torah in front of him, line by line, word by word, stroke by stroke. He would take an entire barrel of ink and spend over a year making an exact copy. Every time that scribe came to the name of the Almighty, Yod He Vav He, Yahweh, he would stop, he would pray, he would wash his hands, and then he would pray and then write the name. He would pray again and then continue on with his work. If the name Yod He Vav He appeared 4 words later, he would stop, he would pray, wash his hands, pray, write the name, pray again, and then continue his work. That is the respect and the integrity with which this scripture has been maintained. Shaul memorized every single one of these words verbatim by the time he was 20 years old. But he said he was more zealous for the Torah than any of his peers. He may have had this memorized by the time he was 16 years old. We don't know. Maybe even younger. Now, how many of you here in the audience are at least twice as old as Shaul when he had this all memorized? How many of you are at least 40 years of age? Raise your hand. Keep them up. Now, those of you who are twice as old as Shaul, how many of you have now memorized the entire Torah? I find that I have to lower my hand too, because I was not raised at the feet of Gamliel. I was raised at the feet of the Lone Ranger, Rin Tin Tin, and Roy Rogers. I know who's faster than a speeding bullet, able to leap tall buildings at a single bound, who, disguised as Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter for a great metropolitan newspaper, fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way. My mind is filled with absolute useless and insignificant facts and figures. But you know, we have found in our research that among the first century followers of Yeshua of Nazareth, not one of them wasted even as much as 1 hour a week in front of the television. Those of you who may be a little more historically challenged, there was not television in the first century. But this is to illustrate the integrity with which Shaul lived his life, and he spent 3 years in Arabia. Shaul said, Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Paul, you call him here in the West by his, Greek nickname, but Shaul, that's what the Lord called him. And so, I use his Hebrew name, and I suppose he would appreciate it if he were around. But anyway, he said Mount Sinai is in Arabia. That is different from what Constantine's mother said. She said Mount Sinai is in Egypt. Of course, the reference for that is Constantine's mommy, chapter 6, verse 66. But we have to understand a little bit of history to understand why she said it was in Egypt instead of where the Bible says. Because after the Battle of Milvian Bridge, Constantine, according to the Roman record, was on his knees at sunrise. He was on his knees praying to the Roman sun god, Sol Invictus Mithra, the invincible sun Mithra. And he said that he saw the sign of the cross. Now, that really is no big revelation, because anyone who looks at the sun has to squint, and when you squint your eyes, you will always see the cross, because that's the way light diffracts. But yet, as he was praying to the sun god, Sol Invictus Mithra, he said that he saw the sign of the cross and heard a voice, in this sign, conquer. In this sign, conquer. Now, let's go back a little bit and find out why Constantine was praying to the Roman sun god. When at the Tower of Babel, the languages were confused, then just to the north, in Iran or ancient Persia, the Persians worshipped the Persian version of Tammuz, which his name was Mithra. But the sign of Mithra was the Babylonian Tau, or cross. Now, when the Romans conquered the Persians, the Roman soldiers took on the worship of Sol Invictus Mithra and put on their battle standards the sign of the cross. When Constantine came up with this, in this sign conquer, and put the cross on the battle standards, the church fathers said, what is all this about this adoration of the cross? We remember that the cross is the sign of Mithra, the Roman sun god, and that the sign of the cross was on the Roman battle standards before the birth of Yeshua. The early church fathers knew that this is a sign of Sol Invictus Mithra. That's why the Romans sacrificed the Jews and everyone else that they pleased on the cross, because it was a sacrifice to their God. You look up in the Encyclopedia Britannica Junior, and it will tell you the birth date of Mithra, the Roman sun god, December 25th. No secret, Tammuz, the Babylonian sun god, was born on December 25th. Ra, the Egyptian sun god, born on December 25th. When Antiochus Epiphanes, a Syrian Greek general, came into Jerusalem, took over the Temple Mount, roasted a sow on the brazen altar of sacrifice, and set up a statue of Zeus on the Temple Mount, declaring Zeus to be God. He did it on Zeus's birthday, December 25th. There was one day, I will guarantee you, that Yeshua of Nazareth was not born December 25th. But who was? Little baby Tammuz and Mithra. Join us again next time for episode 6 of the 11-part series, The Sinai Connection, Israel's ancient title deed to the land. This is Michael Rood sailing the Yam Suf, bidding you shalom, peace, and I'll see you when the smoke clears.